All right, you curious Herle Burlyites. We have a fabulous guest and discussion coming up for this week's pod. But first, I want to start by calling out a recent comment from KLF33 on the Apple Ratings and Reviews Industrial Complex, who says this: I moved to Canada 25 years ago, and this show represents everything that is good in this country. It is so informative and thought-intriguing, it should be mandatory education in our high schools. Well, first I want to thank you, KLF33. That was very generous. And if anybody at Dr. Martin Lebolda's high school in Regina is listening, Herle as a mandatory high school course is pretty much exactly where you thought this would all end up, isn't it? All right, Michelle Rempel Garner is our guest this week, making her second appearance here on the Herle Burly. You all know the Conservative member for Calgary Nose Hill. She's a vocal force, both within her own party and in the House. Ms. Rempel Garner is a former cabinet minister in Stephen Harper's government. And when I say she's a vocal force, part of the reason for that is her nuanced, long-form Substack writing on a variety of complex social and public policy issues. As Michelle says, no talking points, no speechwriters. We're going to dive a little deeper into that today, her observations on a changing media landscape, the role of the CBC, and how to connect with people in non-traditional ways. We'll get her thoughts on the current government from the perspective of an opposition MP, the current state of the Conservative Party of Canada and how she feels about the leadership of the country. And finally, we'll get her observations on the Alberta election. So it's a full agenda. Michelle Rempel Garner, thank you for coming back to the Herle Burly. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me, mandatory high school course.
Can you imagine?
I'll be your first sign up for it.
Hey, last time we were on a panel together was at the Banff Forum, and that was a bit spicy.
It was spicy. It was great.
Yeah. It was a bit spicy. It eventually broke down into a lot of recriminations and anger, but that was neither your fault nor my fault.
It was very interesting. It's the mark of a good panel when the audience devolves into anarchy. It's good.
Exactly. Totally. You told me you're in Ottawa today.
I am. The House is sitting.
Yeah.
We are on the final stretch before the House rises for the summer.
Are you there religiously when the House is sitting?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot, right? So here during the week, and then it's, usually Friday morning, I'm on a plane back to Calgary, then I'm on a plane back here on Sunday. So it's pretty constant, but, still, after all these years, feel really privileged to be able to do it.
Yeah. What's a Saturday look like?
Events in the riding, usually.
Like what?
So my riding is it's a suburban riding, but there's a lot of community associations, and I think that there's been a lot of pent up demand post-pandemic for the community to get back together. So there's just a lot of events happening, and I think right now too, there's a real hunger in the community for people to have, particularly their elected officials, out listening to them. I think that there's a lot of angst in the country and not a lot of outlets for it. And I'm really just trying to be out in the community as often as I can to really have my finger on the pulse. So when I come back to Ottawa, and you're sort of in the Ottawa bubble, all of your listeners know the Ottawa bubble, the lobbyist corps, the diplomatic corps, the media. That's not, my constituency. So Saturdays are now, particularly post-pandemic, they're really about, seeing the whites of the eyeballs of people in the community and listening.
You wrote a beautiful Substack on the weekend for Mother's Day.
Thanks.
About what it's like to be a stepmom.
Yeah.
And mostly what it made me think about is what a shit I was to my stepdad. But you seem to be having a lovely experience.
It's been a learning experience for sure. I wrote in that piece that of all the, titanic battles I've had in politics and all of, the experiences I had in business prior to politics, nothing really prepared me for the growth, the personal growth that was required to step into that very important role. And it's been really fulfilling. But it certainly made me learn a lot about myself and also change myself too, right? You can't be selfish when you've got kids. And, as both a stepchild...
Are you wicked?
Some people would say yes. I hope my children would say no. I think that there's a necessary amount of wickedness involved in any job, but certainly I think Melissa Fint, or however you say her name, she maybe got a bad rap from time to time, but yeah, no, it's I appreciate that. I think it's important too for elected officials to, be vulnerable and share experiences from time to time. And Mother's Day has always looked a little different for me, and I think that that's indicative of a lot of people across the country, right? People have different experiences, and in a pluralism, I think it's really important that we share them.
Yeah, just a day to get through for me now.
Yeah.
So Substack.
Yes.
How do you find that as a platform?
Are you
enjoying being on there? Are you enjoying writing on it?
Here's my ShamWow infomercial for Substack. I love it. It changed my life. I love it. It's such a great platform. I think it's the antidote to 140 character soundbite, Twitter wars, misinformation. It's challenged me to really think about my position on issues, to show the people that, pay my salary what I'm thinking about in terms of public policy and, as you said, different social issues. And I've had just an enormous amount of positive feedback from it. It's kind of restored my hope in political communications. And I think that's been indicative of the growth that I've seen on the platform. I started this really as just an outlet and, an experiment. And, I really started writing on it in earnest in late October of last year. So in a really short period of time, there's over 34,000 subscribers on there now, and from across the political spectrum. So yeah, it's really been transformative.
Do you know who they are?
So Substack doesn't provide a breakdown in the same way that Facebook does on demographic, but
right.
Conversely, what it does is it gives you direct access to your readership or your viewership or your subscribers. So I have email addresses, right?
Oh, right.
And that's a fundamentally different transaction between a content creator and their audience than what you would see on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, traditional platforms. And I think that is actually the future of social media, diverting from politics a little bit here, but the whole concept of a subscriber network, as opposed to a social media network where you've got the platform is the intermediary, and their algorithms control who sees what and who communicates with who. I have a direct relationship with the readers on Substack, and that is incredible. I am no longer incented to create content that drives towards clicks and likes or algorithmic, maximization. I am now incented to produce content that builds and nurtures a relationship with a real big cross section of people who I can tell are of different political stripe because they write to me in response.
Right.
So it's. I think you're going to see a lot more people of all persuasions, industries migrate to these types of platforms, and I think that's a really, really positive thing for civil discourse.
Right. And what are you using it for? So I presume that you don't really use it to reach your riding, your voters in your riding. There may be some readers, but I presume that you have a national audience on Substack, and a lot of it will be people in politics. So when you write, what are you thinking about? Like, who are you trying to reach, and what are you trying to accomplish?
Well, I write a lot. I've always written a lot as a member of parliament in my entire time in office. So, on any given day, I am writing content, be it prep for a committee or after I've read some briefing materials or after I've done my own research on something. I am notating stuff to myself, right? So I can be prepared to communicate. And what I've sort of just decided to do is, rather than just leaving all of those things, stuffed in scribbly notes and, shredding them at the end of the week, is to actually take an hour or two and provide those thoughts to the public. So, my content is certainly a melange. It's not siloed into one particular area, but neither is, that's not how a member of parliament's job works. You're not siloed into one area. You have to have a little bit of understanding of everything that's au courant, and also looking to where the football is going, right, in terms of a public policy perspective. So I'm trying to bring my readership into my thought process as a legislator to let them see what I'm seeing in a more intimate way. So that they understand when I'm making decisions, how I'm making decisions, what's on my mind, what I'm seeing, but also, where there isn't necessarily public attention on an issue that I think there should be attention on, that I'm trying to breathe some oxygen into that from the perspective of, public engagement. But,
Right.
That long form writing, and it's not super long. I mean, I'm trying to stick under 900 words. I know that's kind of the attention span level for most writers. But I think it's really important because it's not just about that small, unnuanced, partisan 140 character jab. And right. I don't know, it's been good for me from a productivity and a focus perspective. And I hope it's bringing value to people who are reading.
You've given a couple sideways shots at Twitter. Do you still use Twitter?
No, not really. A little bit. Certainly not the way that I did 10 years ago. I don't see the value in the platform the way that it used to have. I don't know if it's just a change in algorithm, the change in user base. But it's very difficult to have a productive conversation on Twitter. Right now, I'm using it mostly to expose people to my longer form pieces, commenting on particular, what I would think would be significant or deemed to be significant statements. But in terms of like a public engagement direct forum, it's lost its utility, I think. Maybe that'll change over the next year. I know that its current owner is trying to transform it more into a quote unquote everything app. We'll see how that plays out. But for right now, in terms of value for my time in communication, Substack is a better platform for sure.
Yeah. Cool. And in terms of you've always been on the cutting edge of comms. So I'm interested. How are you? Well, you have been. How are you communicating with your constituents these days?
Well, the thing is, my constituents aren't a homogenous group, right? I have all demographics, all backgrounds. So I'm using everything, everything from the traditional sort of MP householder, virtual town halls, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, direct emails, Substack, Twitter, phone calls. I mean, communication with my meetings, roundtables, communication with my constituents. It's if you don't know how to communicate and you are a member of parliament, you have a large problem. So everything, I would say, and I'm just trying. It's a constantly evolving situation of understanding how my community wants to communicate with me, and then matching to that, and that's changed over the years, and it's changing today. So, it's I sort of looking back on my time in office to date, just. As you said, sort of being on the cutting edge of how to communicate as society has changed how it consumes information has been a very interesting process. Maybe something I'll write about someday.
Excellent. With wildfires continuing to rage across Alberta and all the displacement and destruction they bring, I simply want to convey this message from our presenting sponsor, TELUS. When things are at their worst, Canadians can count on TELUS to be at its very best. That's in terms of both financial resources and human compassion, the heart, Herle Burlyites, that always drives just how far a group of people will go to help. In TELUS's case, they've made an initial commitment of $5 million to local charities and on-the-ground organizations supporting relief efforts like the Canadian Red Cross and the Salvation Army. That's the money part. And then there's the people part. As you can imagine, with a widespread natural disaster like this one, affecting over 19,000 evacuees at last count, connectivity to loved ones and emergency services is critical. TELUS technicians are working 24/7 to bolster infrastructure and connectivity under some very tough conditions. Think getting emergency generators up and running so additional cell sites can power wireless all over the province, erecting a new cell tower outside Drayton Valley so evacuees and first responders can stay connected, and adding extra network technology like smart hubs and power banks to evacuation centers. The phrase, "it's a team effort," has been thrown around so frequently, it's become a reflexive response that's lost its power. I want to reclaim it here, because so many groups working across the company are committing themselves to help. The TELUS Friendly Future Foundation, TELUS Edmonton and Northern Alberta Community Board, TELUS Calgary and Southern Alberta Community Board, TELUS Indigenous Communities Fund, TELUS Agriculture and TELUS Health. And it goes far beyond the connectivity supports I've already mentioned. Food, water, diapers, disaster kits, fundraising drives, mental health supports for farmers, emergency veterinary care for cattle, and so much more. TELUS is also poised to respond to the rainfall and flooding in communities across BC. I'll leave it there, except to say, let's all hope, pray, for better news in the days to come. Are you concerned about the deterioration and perhaps imminent demise of mainstream media in the country? I have this podcast and you have your Substack. And what I think about is that, so there's an issue of Chinese interference and I have a podcast and people talk about it and you write a Substack and you talk about it. But if Fife doesn't report that in the first place, if the Globe doesn't report that in the first place, I've got nothing to talk about on the podcast.
Yeah.
Right?
So maybe I'll change your question a little bit. I would say I'm concerned about the demise of journalism in Canada. So let's, cheers to Bob Fife. He comes, the knife cuts equally across all political stripe, but
Sure does.
He is a brilliant journalist, an investigative journalist. Probably, one of the best of a generation. And his journalism has held governments of all political stripe to account. But a lot of, let's talk about, okay, so I will attempt to be nonpartisan in this discussion. Partisan hat off on the media bailout programs, right? I don't really think that media bailout program has hired more journalists. I think what means like traditional print media outlets and traditional, television broadcast news outlets are still doing is they're still maximizing. They're maximizing to algorithmic output too, right? They're looking for clicks and likes. Opinion is cheaper than journalism. And I am concerned that how, that there are very few journalists that are being, invested into in any way, shape, or form. And
there isn't a newspaper in Canada that is a viable business proposition.
I would agree.
Okay.
I would actually agree.
Right.
And so to me, now partisan hat back on, for the government to take a direct role, an oversight role in funding what has largely become opinion content, I think is highly problematic. But I think that's why we are, there's so much pearl clutching about conversations around the amount of money that we're putting into the CBC, into traditional mechanisms, these bills like C11, C18 that the Liberals have put forward that are quote unquote designed to protect Canadian content that I think are actually going to lead to the demise of Canadian content. I think if anybody across political stripe cares about journalism, access to information, transparency, any of these things, our traditional ways of, sort of supporting that, they're not cutting it. And, we're overdue for a conversation on this. And, that's where I've started to write about that as well, too.
So where does it take you in terms of your thinking about the CBC?
So I wrote a piece. I think this is what you were referring to earlier, saying that the CBC is defunding itself. No help from the Conservatives required.
Yeah.
And I wrote this before, this real start of the uproar. And it was after the CBC had made the announcement that they would like to migrate entirely to digital content. Which,
not a broadcaster anymore.
Yeah, which, frankly, that's where the audience is for the most part. Of course, there's, being cognizant of the need for French language radio, et cetera.
But most of their audience are remote shut-ins.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. But I will say this, the CBC doesn't, okay, let's say that, let's talk about CBC Gem, right? Which is CBC's response to like Disney Plus. CBC does not have the library of Disney. And if Chrystia Freeland, our finance minister, says that we should cut our Disney Plus subscriptions as, it's a superfluous expense, then where's the argument for CBC Gem with virtually no library? I mean, come on, like, let's be honest, right? So I do think it's like the CBC, and then you've got, it's.
Why do you hate Coronation Street?
I'm just saying that, like, let's be serious here, where there is a limited audience, like people only have so much money for subscription services. Are they going to pick Disney Plus or Gem? And then is it the role of the Canadian taxpayer to intervene in that matter? And I would kind of argue no, right? So, just going back to it, you layer that on top of the fact that this is a supposedly nonpartisan public broadcaster whose executive team is being openly partisan. I mean, picking the battle with my party during the last election, some of the, the memos that have come out of the CEO's office, like they're partisan, right? And like, so pulling all of that aside and asking what is the public value of CBC, it's not the same equation that was there in the early 1980s. And it is incumbent upon Parliament and the government to recognize that, because like, that's not, the money is not going where it needs to go now. And I know that there's a lot of people across the country, including journalists. Like I think about Justin Ling. So Justin Ling also has a Substack, and Justin Ling is like a legit like journalist. He does great work. And he has managed to self-fund himself. Like there's a lot of people like Justin in this country that if they had like the most minute fraction of public support to do actual journalistic work, as compared to what the CBC is doing, I think we'd have a much more just and open society. And that's the conversation we need to be having. I actually think the CBC is defunding itself. It's becoming increasingly irrelevant. It's arguments for public funding are becoming increasingly irrelevant. And this is not a partisan comment. You would ask most Canadians and say, like, do I watch the CBC? Most Canadians would be like, no, I don't. So how does it become relevant, right?
Let's separate two things, because I'll just be honest with you. I don't care about their entertainment division. I don't. I don't watch it, I'll be honest with you. And so it's never meant anything to me since I stopped watching The Friendly Giant. So
God bless.
I don't care about that. I care a lot about the news. I care a lot about the news division. And to me, I believe the CBC is still a backbone of journalism in this country, of news creation in this country. And if we lose that, I think that's a pretty fundamental pillar of what we have left. I mean, if we still had the 1990 infrastructure in the private sector, it might be a different discussion, but we don't.
Okay, but and I'm going to put my Alberta MP hat on.
Okay.
When I turn on CTV, first of all, I'll start by saying I am pro-journalism, pro-news. We need more of it. We need more access to information. It keeps the government held to account. It keeps everybody held to account in the political process. Keeps corporations held to account. We need that. One. But as an Alberta MP, if I turn on CBC National News right now, I guarantee you there is going to be 10 times the coverage of American news as opposed to anything in my province or in Western Canada. That's problematic for me when I don't see myself reflected and my constituents reflected in national news coverage. Huge problem, one. Number two, even when there are issues that are like, so for example, I know my colleague Michael Chong, he had been scheduled to go on a CBC News show, and he was sitting in the lobby, I think, and they went to cover, I don't know, some sort of entertainment story, and they bumped him off without any explanation. There have been multiple times where, I have to argue whether or not wonder whether or not the CBC is giving, like equal time to different like takes of or political viewpoints. And a lot of CBC News's coverage has been opinion. You've got the at issue panel, you've got all of these, it's opinion, it's not journalism. So yes to journalism. And there have been articles that, recently where the CBC has blown, the cover off of big stories. but there's a lot of what you see on their broadcast is opinion, and it's a coverage of primarily American politics, and you don't see a lot of diversity and coverage from across the country. And I know people are going to clutch their pearls and say no, but like, I'm really trying to be objective here. And what I'm trying to say is that I don't think that the CBC, their governance, has looked internally and said, okay, we are becoming irrelevant. How do we increase our relevancy? And
no, I don't disagree with you there. It's been run by a bunch of farm animals for a long time, but
that's bold. That's bold. I didn't say that. Please don't attribute that to me. Thank you.
Do you think it was inappropriate of the CBC president to take issue with Poilievre's pledge to defund it?
I think
they should be silent on that?
If I was in her shoes, my response would have been, this is the vision of the CBC going forward. This is why it should exist. Here's how we're going to meet, the needs of our mandate over the next 10 years. And I would have just stated a value proposition, right? Instead, she got into partisan mudslinging. It's actually, my party leader's right as a parliamentarian to question these things and to talk about value for money. And, the fact that she didn't automatically pivot into, well, you're wrong. Of course we have to fund this because this is the value we will provide the Canadian public. I think that's really telling. I think the CBC is having a hard time explaining its value proposition to Canadians. And just circling back to the front of our conversation, at a time when we need more journalism, more investigative reporting, when we need coverage on regional issues to unite our country in a sense of some sort of sense of national identity, the broadcaster is failing. They are failing in that. They've changed.
Well, one last crack at this. I bet you that the CBC is doing a better job of covering the Alberta election than any other media outlet.
Do you see any of that, on the national news loop consistently?
No, but I see it on the CBC Alberta website.
Okay, but the point is that it's supposed to be a national broadcaster. And my precise criticism is that its local coverage is siloed, right? And ostensibly, you would have more cross-national coverage. And, a national broadcaster would be explaining to somebody in downtown Toronto why this coverage or this story has national significance.
100% agree with that.
And that's what I don't see, right? And, for the record, there's a lot of also independent media outlets that are also covering the Alberta election and probably getting more eyeballs on their content than the CBC is. And I just want to be very clear, I am not here, I'm not here to denigrate CBC reporters. I think there's a lot of ones that do good work, but the opinion heavy content that is, I think, I'm just going to say it, I think it's biased in a lot of circumstances or focused on American news coverage. Or things like I think Canadians should just when at a time when we need more coverage of our issues, our identity, the CBC is failing at that. They've changed their journalistic standards and practices too on objectivity. I think that's highly, highly problematic. Or that's my understanding anyways. I just, so just a long answer to your question, was it inappropriate for the CEO to wade in that way? Yeah, of course it was. And you know what? If I was that board, I can't believe the board isn't sitting around huddling in a severe issues management crisis mode right now going, we have a big job to do. So I don't know.
You haven't met that board.
It's go time.
Okay. I'm going to talk again here about something that will, without question, pile even more price increases onto what consumers in this country are already putting up with. It's a plan the government quietly slipped into the federal budget at the urging of a special interest group that deploys a cadre of lobbyists in Ottawa. Effectively, the plan would force the railways to transfer cargo to each other, back and forth, at the whim of shippers. But of course, at the expense of the railroads. The people behind this campaign are running a lot of ads on social media, making all sorts of claims about how wonderful this will be for the economy. They say it will make cargo shipments more efficient. They say it will result in more railway jobs. And they actually say it will mean lower prices for consumers. If you believe that, dear listeners, you will believe thunder curdles milk. The fact is, there are only so many trains in this country and only so much track. Pretty much everything consumers consume is moved on those trains at some point. Our sponsor, CN, puts tremendous effort into running its network at optimum capacity. It's a remarkably complicated job involving precision coordination and big technology investments. But the railway has had great success. CN trains are leaving and arriving on time, and the company has set records in the past year for moving Western grain, to cite one example. Now, just imagine what will happen if shippers get involved and start dictating freight schedules. Well, let me spell that out. The cargo handoffs will snarl traffic. They will soak up time and personnel. They will result in delays. They will drive up the railway's costs. And who do you think will pay for it? The same person who always pays, the consumer. In other words, you. Cargo delays will ripple down through the economy. Those accursed waiting lists will grow. And absolutely, certainly, and inevitably, prices will rise. Why the government would want to take such a disruptive step during a time of inflation to please one special interest group is baffling. But that's politics. What I'm saying here is that it will cost you money. Think about that, and maybe tell your MP. You supported Patrick Brown for the leadership of the CPC.
I did.
You did. Why did you do that? Why was that your choice?
I am, first of all, I'll start by saying, Pierre has united the caucus, and I fully support him. And he had a huge mandate from the membership, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that. I also think that he's really giving the Liberals right now a run for their money in a way that I think a lot of Liberals don't want to admit, but we can get back to that. For Patrick, at the time, Mr. Poilievre is my sixth leader in 7 years. We've gone through a lot of leadership turmoil, and I thought it was really important to have outside voices and voices from parts of the country where Conservatives need to make inroads, including, Brampton, in the leadership race. And for me, that was as important, if not more important, than backing the leader. I think diversity particularly in leadership races, diversity in opinion, in policy, and I know how naive this sounds, but it's important to me. And so, I put my money where my mouth was there. I am glad, and I wrote a long piece about this in the fall. I'm really glad that, that period of tumult, that long time that was really difficult to live in the post-Harper years, I feel like that has settled out, that there is unity in our caucus, that there isn't this ongoing war of succession. And I think that the public's starting to see that too, right? We're all rowing in the same direction. And, Pierre has a lot to do with that. So it's
well, I would argue you have a lot to do with it.
I'm a cog in the wheel.
Because you're the person who's behaving like an adult and not creating trouble.
Of course,
right?
I have to behave like an adult.
You are paying a price. You're paying a price for supporting Brown.
Can I just go on a rant here now that you've given me an opening? Of course, I have to behave like. Do I get to swear on this show?
Yeah.
Of course, I have to fucking behave like an adult. That's my job. We're in the middle of a housing crisis, an affordability crisis. We're in a massive geopolitical instability. That the country is angry, and for me to sit back and just be like, oh, this is about me or some level of purity or whatever. It doesn't matter where I'm sitting in the House of Commons. It doesn't matter anything other than. We need a change in government. That's what my constituents are saying. At the very least, the government needs to be held to account and understand that we are off the rails right now. So I like internal party fights that I have to put myself in the shoes of one of my constituents, and that's a ridiculous proposition. So, of course I have to act like an adult. Everybody does. It is a serious time to be an elected official right now. And anybody who's not treating it that way, shame on them. There's my rant.
If you change your mind there's your rant. If you change your mind and you want to create trouble, inter-party fights are my specialty. So
I've heard. No, I've had enough. to my own detriment, like the one thing I've tried to be consistent about is like prevent caucus from turfing leaders, because it's just like, you guys, we need stability. What's done is done. But like the fact that we have stability in our caucus right now, like I'm going to get a little emotional. Like it's a really good thing, and it makes, my life easier. And it's interesting to watch, the Liberals on the other side. I think they are entering a period of wilderness now. I think that, there's people within their caucus that see that they don't see the direction anymore. They don't see that win. And, it's not something I take glee in, because I know what it's like to be, what that feels like. But that's where the Liberals are at now. And I think that you're going to see more and more disunity.
You think that's what they're feeling? Because it's interesting.
100%. No, 100%.
My conversations in Ottawa make me think that the people elected in Ottawa are a little complacent about it, that they have a view that Poilievre is ultimately too extreme and can't be elected. And the other factor, which you'll know from having been a minister yourself, is they all think that they're very, very good at their jobs and that their jobs are very, very important. And surely people will ultimately see that the people, and what I'm saying now, I could have said about any cabinet in any government in history. Eventually, people come to think they're irreplaceable.
So I'm so glad you brought this up, because there's a point in government where, when you're a cabinet minister, it's really easy to get sucked into this, like all these meetings with your stakeholders and your bureaucrats and people that are lobbying you, and like get involved in, but you, as a cabinet minister, you're still an elected official, and you still have to have your roots solidly in the ground of the people that you represent. You can't take your eyes off home base for a minute. But that Ottawa bubble of, bureaucracy and, policy work and managing government, it's this comforting, warm blanket, but it is not reality, right? And I think your assessment is absolutely right. There's a lot of Liberals who are in this very warm blanket that the rest of the country is not, right? And there was some really interesting data. I think it was David Coletto's firm put out this week on perceptions of Trudeau and of Poilievre, respectively. And there's some data that should make Liberals, that I know instinctively is true, that people think Trudeau is hiding things more than Poilievre is, or that Poilievre is more competent, that they're equal on the caring metric. That, to me, says that, like, if this is what Liberals are telling you, that everything is fine, they're either deluding themselves, like they're trying to create a narrative in their own head to make things are okay, or they're just really out of touch. And I think it's the latter, David, I really do. But I don't think that's the entirety of their caucus. I really don't. I mean, not that I've been around the Hill for a hot minute, and I know when things change. And something that, is not discussed in English media enough is the challenge that the Liberals are facing in Quebec, particularly from a resurgent bloc and even Conservatives to a certain extent. But I know that their Liberal
caucus, we're not seeing that in the polls.
Their Liberals, their Liberal caucus, their Quebec caucus is concerned about their seats. You can tell it. You can see it in their faces when they debate Quebec issues and when Quebec issues come up in the House in question period. And then I think that there's other members of their caucus that are going, what is this guy doing? This guy being the Prime Minister. What's our vision? Where are we going? Why are we talking about this when we need to be actually addressing the affordability crisis? And the last thing is that the Liberals are now at this point where everything that they talk about is the response to every question is spending, right? We've spent this. But the average Canadian is like, I don't care that you've spent this. I haven't gotten anything more for it. In fact, you're spending more and I'm getting less. And I think that their caucus is deeply concerned that their leadership isn't there. And like the last thing on this rant that I'll say is, this
is the dumbest thing about government communications, period, Michelle. It's the dumbest thing. They always want to lead with the amount of money they're spending on something. And who cares? Like, I don't know, as a consumer, is that the right amount of money? Is it too much? Is it too little? Tell me what you're trying to fucking do. Like, what's it supposed to accomplish?
I know. Right? Like it's at the end of the day, it's, well, what have you done for me, right? And if so like if you and I had a business and we're sitting around and you're like, okay, well, like tell me about your deliverables this quarter and your P&L this quarter. I'd be like, and I came to you and I said, well, I spent a bunch of money and that was it. You'd fire me, right? Of course you would. and Canadians like people instinctively understand, especially right now when people are spending more to get less. They instinctively understand that when the government stands up and says, well, I spent more and can't say what we got out of it, it's so out of touch. And I think that's what's going to do them in, honestly. And, the last thing I'll say is maybe like a non-obvious observation. I think that the PMO, like they've lost staff over the last year, right? You've seen the communications director depart, but they've had a lot of scandal. They've, been in sort of constant crisis mode. And you just get the sense that there's few people that are in that inner circle, but there's they're dealing with a lot of issues management now, and they're tired. And you can see that they're making mistakes in their comms. There isn't that forward vision. And at the same time, you've got an invigorated Conservative Party that is getting its message together on, key issues. And I think that dynamic is something that's where you're seeing the movement in the polls nationally. I really do. And it's exciting. It's exciting, being on my side of the aisle to see that happen finally. But I think it spells big problems for the Liberals, for sure. And there are people that are going to be outraged I'm saying this, but they're also going to be like, oh, she's right. And I hate that because I am right.
So assuming he wins,
which he,
in what ways, Poilievre, assuming Poilievre wins the election, which I would agree with you is the way to bet at the current time. My friend Ellie Alboim has always reminded me that there are no facts in the future, but that would be the way to bet. How will a Poilievre government be the most different from this Trudeau government?
Well, let's go back to what we were just talking about, spending more and getting less. I think that a Poilievre government would first and foremost reverse that trend, right? It would enshrine the principle that Canadians are spending more and getting less, and it would be 100% focused on, the big crisis issues in the country right now. It's why, the leader of our party is spending so much time talking about housing affordability. I know his heart actually, it's really there. When he addresses our caucus, when he's addressing public events, it's housing affordability. I know that would be a big focus. Value for money in government spending, in terms of exactly what you just said, Canadians being able to see what they're getting for all of this money, as opposed to just longer lines and less service. And I think actually just really translating government policy, and I'm speaking on a very macro level here, but translating government policy instead of these high-level esoteric things where we're talking about consultants and buzzwords and all this ecosystem of people that aren't the average Canadian, kind of moving away dramatically from that Trudeau government culture to a culture of when we are acting as government, the role of government is to help Canadians directly. And sort of re-enshrining that principle in government operations, which I think the Trudeau government has really drifted far away from. They will argue with me till the cows come home on this. They'll be like, no, we care about Canadians. But it's like, well, Canadians don't see that. We've got transit projects failing. We've got affordability issues. And I think that there will be a marked difference. And I think that it's going to resonate with Canadians. And I don't think the Liberals see this coming. I really don't think they see that.
So on my other podcast, The Curse of Politics, we spent some time talking about, as recently as this week, why it is that Poilievre strays from the issues that you're talking about to talk about his own buzzwords and his own pet things, Magna Cartas and various other Jordan Petersonian affectations, because it doesn't seem like he's as laser focused on the economy as certainly the polling data would indicate that he ought to be.
I look at it differently. I think that Canadians have watched the Trudeau Liberal government. Are we going to talk about passports? Are we going to do this?
Sure.
The Trudeau government, let's use passports as the example. The big Trudeau government announcement of the week was the crayon drawing passport. That was the big announcement. And Canadians watch what the government is focused on. So the government's big announcement last week was crayon drawing passport. And they go, well, like, what about the economy? What about everything else? And I think when Poilievre comes out and actually says, you know what, this is crazy, he's actually drawing a contrast with the government and saying, I actually
No, but wait a second. If I can
matters.
argue with you, he's not saying it's crazy they're focusing on the passport. He's saying it's crazy they took Terry Fox off. And I might agree with him. But is that the fight he should be having?
That's what you're taking away as a former Liberal strategist. I would argue that what the Canadian public is taking away is, what's going on here, right? And I think that that's something that a lot of Liberals are discounting about Pierre, is the fact that he is speaking a language that Canadians understand. You know, there's all this uproar around him. I think this is several months ago now. He was talking about plain language in government. Pierre
Anglo-Saxon words.
He speaks plain language, and he talks about what people are communicating on, and that is resonating. Like, so, you know, partisan hat off, it's showing in the data, it's showing in polling data, and it's really easy for the political class to dismiss this, the Liberal political class to dismiss this, and like just have this massive blind spot on, you know, some of the things that he's saying and how that's resonating, what they are. And the Liberals have nada to counter it with other than personal attacks. And I think that's a recipe. I mean, it's great for, you know, the prospects of a change in government, but like, if that's the advice, that's the best Liberal strategists can come up with, they're going to lose the next election, for sure.
Speaking of value for money, what do you think about that VW battery plant?
I need more details on it, to be really blunt. I have a lot of questions. I think that there is definitely a need in the country to talk about how we're repatriating some of our own manufacturing capacity, creating those types of jobs in Canada, making sure that we have supply chain resiliency, all of these like really foundational economic issues that, you know, then you layer on, okay, well, what are the products that we need in that supply chain in the future? It's an important discussion, but like, you know, I'll put it this way, I have questions. They need to be transparent about what they're expecting here, how this was negotiated, and whether or not it's going to deliver value for money over time and actually translate into those objectives. And, you know, you've got this government that has, you know, is being derided by journalists, saying it's the least transparent government in history. I can't even get
since the last one. Since the last one,
no,
they say.
No, far more. No, David, honestly, this government has taken, like, the ATIP system is broken. You know, the responses I get back to order paper questions, they are like, you know, they are opaque, and nobody, like, I take issue with that. Like, it's crazy. So I mean, that's the key. I think what the Liberals want is they want someone like me to, you know, come out and slam a deal. But they expect that they are also going to keep all the details of the deal close to their vest, so that, you know, journalists, people like you, people like me, can't go through the line items. And I think that for me, that's the biggest issue that I have right now, is that it's so hard for the public to scrutinize expenditures. For a government that uses, you know, spending as a metric and talking point on everything, and we don't have the ability to really scrutinize what they're spending money on and whether or not it's going to work. It's problematic. When you're talking about, what is it, 13 billion for, we don't even know it, 15 billion.
13.
And then trying to, you know, do a robust analysis as we would if we were on a corporate board on value for money. It's hard without that data. And that's what the Canadian public should be really cheesed about.
It seems to me, Michelle, that at the core of it is a leap of faith, that there isn't really a robust economic analysis of this, but what there is a belief that that's the future, and that's the way cars are going to be made, and that's where the supply chains are going to be like, and we just need to jump in. We just need to get in there somehow.
Okay, but like, again, I have some business background, right? And if
Yeah.
somebody came to me and asked for $13 billion on a leap of faith, I would tell them to take a leap, right? Like I'm going to point to, I think there was a vaccine plant in Quebec, right, that the government spent hundreds of millions of dollars on that they basically they said we're bankrupt. We don't know where that money went. What's the guarantee?
Right.
How long is this? How many batteries is this going to produce? Over what time period? What's the guarantees around jobs?
Well, the one thing Michelle, is
right?
that when Volkswagen tells you something, you can take it to the bank.
I just don't trust this government. I mean, like,
I don't trust Volkswagen.
I'll put it this way. There was this great exchange. I think it was earlier this year. It was in January. It was around budget scrutiny, I think, in the Senate, where Chrystia Freeland was asked around, like, there was $2 billion for some sort of company. And she was asked by a senator, like, well, what does this company do? Well, I don't know. Right? Like we're being asked, like, you can just see that anybody who's asked for anything is getting money put into the budget without that rigor that would be expected in any other circumstance. Like even at the household level, you're not going to be spending $2,000 on something. If somebody came to any Canadian today and said, oh, I'd like $2,000 to take a leap of faith, like you'd want details. And it should be no different on a $16 billion expenditure, no matter how laudable the objective is. So I guess, the long answer to your question is I don't know. I don't know because I don't have that data available to me as a parliamentarian. And I hate that the government, one of their biggest sins is forcing Parliament into this false dichotomy, this false discussion around you have to just make value judgments on projects without scrutinizing public expenditures. And I think that's fundamentally wrong.
See, I think if I was advising Poilievre, I would advise him to embrace that thing. Because I think I would advise him to embrace Biden on climate.
But it's $16 billion.
Say, I'm going to have the Biden climate plan, which means I don't have to have a carbon tax, which means I can continue to drill for oil. But I'm going to invest a shitload of money in clean technologies.
Okay, but if somebody went to you and said, okay, it's the Gandalf group, right? And said, I need $1 million because it looks good politically because of Biden. But I don't have any details for you on return on investment, but I need $1 million. Like that, you'd never say yes to that. I'd hope not. Like you'd never say yes. So I'm not saying, like, I think you can agree that, like, in principle, Canada needs more capacity in auto manufacturing, battery manufacturing. The question is, what's the best way to get there? And I'm not going to play into this. Well, I think, politically it's good. We're not like that's not, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the Canadian taxpayer. And I'm tired of these types of conversations, right? We should be able to see what the ROI is and whether or not this was the best course of action and what this expenditure gets us. And I think that's a principle worth leaning into. We have to. We're broke as a country. So.
You think we're broke?
There. I do think we're broke.
Do you think we're broke?
Well,
why do you think we're broke? Because all the economists say that our debt's easily carryable, not a problem.
Economists have been so spot on over the last 5 years. Oh, just borrow a bunch. Debt'll always be cheap. And like, we're in an extended growth period. And like, I think all the things you and I've just been talking about around this plant, some of this, the key macroeconomic issues on growth, supply of labor, supply chain resiliency, clarity on regulations. There's so many things that like are so uncertain under this government. You're not seeing massive capital influx into the country. Yet at the same time, you're saying, so that's one side of the balance sheet. On the other side of the balance sheet, you're seeing a massive increase in the structural debt and structural spending of the government. We've doubled the debt of the entire history of the country in a 2-year period. We have lost resilience on the government side of things to be able to weather storms. Yeah, I think
we have lost some, but we still have some, most people say.
It's pretty much like if people aren't understanding that we have to be asking ourselves what we're spending money on in government and prioritizing it to some of those resiliency goals that we just talked about and caring for people. I mean, that's the Ottawa bubble at its finest. It really is. Of
Do you
course,
think you can have this fight about the deficit without relitigating the CERB? And do you want to relitigate the CERB?
we are in 2023 in the spring. We've just had another massive spending budget. What's spent has been spent. Now it's, where are we going? What are we doing from here now that we have all of this debt, now that we have all the expense of servicing this debt, right? And a lot of challenges coming our way. Of course, the Liberal government are going to want to litigate pandemic expenditures and all of these things because they want to live in the past. But that's not where Canadians are living. They're wondering where their next meal is going to come from or how they're going to pay rent next month. And so we have to scrutinize government expenditures from that lens. What does our public coffer look like in 10 years if we are not growing the economy and growing government revenue on one side and really thinking about how we're prioritizing the wherewithal that we do have? So the conversation that you just wanted to drag me in here is exactly what the Liberals want to drag me into. And I won't do it. And my party's not going to do that either. And they don't have an answer for where the 10-year plan is right now. So that's what we're going to be litigating. And I think that's what Canadians want us to litigate too.
Okay, so that's super interesting. And having heard your point of view about that, I presume that you don't support giving multi-billionaire Murray Edwards $500 million to build a hockey arena for his hockey team.
Oh, the hockey arena. It's really interesting to watch this play out in Calgary. So yes, I get to talk about Calgary. Woo! Calgary, we've seen, I want to just talk about what's happening in Calgary as context for what I'm about to say. So the city is growing, right? Because we're a relatively affordable real estate market. There is a lot of jobs. There is economic instability, and there's a lot of questions around the energy sector, but it's Calgary is a good place to live. At the same time, Calgary has not had the love in terms of major infrastructure investments, particularly from the federal government. That when people look at, okay, well, is a city livable? Those are things that I know that the municipal government and the province across political stripe care about when we're looking at building out Calgary as a livable city in the future. And sports infrastructure is important, but so is public transit, so are hospitals, so are nurses, hospitals for doctors and nurses, all of these sorts of things. But it really is about opportunity cost too, right? In my community, for example, North Central Calgary, there's about 50,000 cars that we could be pulling off the road every day, which would, in terms of climate objectives, that's low hanging fruit. If we built an LRT line from Central Calgary up through my riding, and this has been on the books for almost 15 years now, and the project has decreased in scope by 4 times, but increased in price by 4 times. Yeah. And all of this to say is we need more infrastructure in the city. Everything.
Look at Ottawa. You'll be lucky if the wheels are round by the end of it.
Yes, and that's the other thing too, is they hired SNC-Lavalin. They hired SNC-Lavalin to do the oh god. People were like, oh, there's a problem in Ottawa. I'm like, yeah, there's a problem in Ottawa. So, long answer to your question is, my city needs more infrastructure. The concept of how we prioritize that infrastructure, that is something that the provincial government and the municipality.
Come on, you can't dodge this. There's no way you can be a fiscal hawk and say the Trudeau government spends money hand over fist and then defend giving money to Murray Edwards.
No, that's not what I'm saying. That's what you're saying. What I am saying is that my city needs more infrastructure support. It does, and I look at all of I'm just gonna be really blunt with you guys. My province contributes a lot to the country's revenues, particularly from the energy sector. And there's a lot of infrastructure support in Ontario and in Quebec. And it's time. My province needs all sorts of support for public transit, for hospital, and yes, for cultural infrastructure too. I mean, why shouldn't we have nice things? And if this government is going to spend, what I'm saying writ large is it's not my decision to make. This is the decision to make between the provincial and city government right now. And we're in the middle of a provincial election that I'm not going to wade into on this issue. It's not right for me to do that. But I think that I'm not going to shy away from saying that my city needs better infrastructure of all types, and it has been neglected by the federal government. So giddy up.
The federal government doesn't fund hockey arenas anywhere.
Are you sure? I don't know.
Not in Montreal. The Montreal Canadiens play in an arena that was built with 100% private sector money.
Are you sure there wasn't some sort of federal money put into that around it, roads?
Well,
that's my understanding. Is the provincial government on the Calgary deal? It's mostly for the infrastructure around it, right? Mm-hmm. So, which frankly needs to be built anyways.
Right.
I'm just saying.
All right. Well, I'm not going to get a good answer from you on this until the election's over. I can feel it. So let's talk about the election for a minute. You're in Calgary. You're a Calgary MP. The battleground in this election is Calgary. Everybody knows
North Calgary, particularly.
North Calgary. What's the ballot question?
That's a great question. I know what the respective parties would like it to be. I'm just not sure that either of that is resonating on the doors. I don't actually think it's emerged yet. Maybe really blunt.
Okay.
So, I think the NDP would like it to be a question around leadership, and the UCP would like it to be a question around economic management, and a vote for Rachel Notley is a vote for Justin Trudeau, which I would tend to agree with. But that aside, I think that. You look at the four ridings within my federal riding. These are people who just want answers on how am I going to pay my rent and how am I going to afford groceries. That's really what people care about right now. It's so interesting to watch the coverage of this on the oppo dumps, like opposition research dumps and all of that sort of stuff. At the end of the day, that's really what it's boiling down to. As of today, I mean, this could change over the long weekend. I don't get the sense it's a change election. I'm trying to be very objective on that. Janet Brown, who's a very respected local pollster, she had some polling coming out. It came out yesterday that is kind of more indicative of what my sense on the ground is. But there's a lot of campaign left, so we'll see. I certainly think that the NDP has a harder sell than what is being sort of nationally, where there is national coverage, what's being nationally talked about, because there's a big distrust between the federal Liberals and they're like Albertans understand that the federal Liberals are in coalition with the NDP. There's a sense that they're one and the same. And I think that Rachel Notley, people are not talking about that dynamic, but it's sure a dynamic on the door.
She must have felt it because she cut Singh off at the legs the other day. So
sure, 100%. And you've seen, I wrote about this dynamic as well too. You notice the federal government, the federal NDP was pushing Charlie Angus on just transition over and over and over again, and all of a sudden they just stopped talking about that, right? But I think people what Notley is facing is a much higher hill to climb than what Smith is facing, which is a deep-seated, cross-partisan, particularly in North Calgary, distrust of the federal Liberals and now federal NDP coalition. And their campaign has not found a way to address that head on. And I think that is really playing out for sure.
Listen, you considered running for the leadership of that party and you took a hard look under the hood and you walked away.
Yep.
Okay. I'm interested in what you saw, and I'm interested in your honest take to me is, and I know you don't want to get involved in the election, but give me some sense. Is Danielle Smith a serious and stable enough person to be a premier of Alberta?
So I absolutely made the right decision not to run, and I would make it again. And I think it's one of the best decisions I've made in my life. And I think that is a question of self-awareness, not just necessarily, I think it'd be very arrogant for me to say, oh, it's, I didn't run because of the party and this and that. I ran because of self-awareness, knowing that I wasn't the right person to hold that caucus together. And I probably couldn't have. And that does speak to the caucus dynamic. But to her credit, Danielle Smith is holding that caucus together. And there are people who will disagree with that, but she is. And
I hear that on the street, conservatives tell people that you can vote UCP and they're going to dump her. Like, I think I hear people are saying out
that
there,
sounds like
you don't have to worry about Danielle Smith. We'll take care of her.
When you said we had this conversation of like, Michelle, you're acting like an adult. To those people, I would say, act like an adult. This isn't about you. This is about the community and government in a province. And I think she has been able to translate that message in a very sort of humble way to her caucus, that there might be people, I don't know the internals, but like, if what you're saying is true, those are people who are probably haven't accepted the leadership outcome yet. And, part of being in a caucus is when a leadership happens, you respect the outcome of it and you get on board and you move on. But she has been able to knit that voter coalition together. And I think that's remarkable. I don't think I could have done it. Not then. And sometimes, public service has to be about more than yourself and in an ego trip. And in that, I think that's really important. Alberta, unlike the same as any other province. I know that some people think Alberta is this homogenous place where everybody thinks the same way and it's all part of the same basket. And it's really not. There's regional differences. There's political differences within the right. And I think it takes a lot of prescience to understand, and like where she comes from, and I've known her for 20 years. She's got this sort of libertarian bent. She's very passionate on certain community support issues, on equality. She has a very I think progressive view on environmental policy too. At the same time, she's very strong on issues like around civil liberties, and she's unapologetic about that. And so she understands, we wouldn't be having this conversation of trying to necessarily
not many people that are known to be strong on civil liberties use a Nazi comparison.
Let me finish on this.
Okay.
I think it's unfair to overlay. We would never overlay sort of a Ontario, Montreal perspective on a leader in Atlantic Canada. And we shouldn't do that with Alberta. And I'm not going to comment on the opposition research. I mean, voters will do that. But you asked me about her ability to lead that party, and that's my assessment of it. So,
well, I was actually asking more about whether she could lead the province, whether you're confident in her to be a premier.
I think that she is a much stronger choice than the NDP. I really think that I want somebody who is not going to go along to get along with the federal government, given their track record on the province. And I'm just not confident that Rachel Notley is going to do that. And that's really important to me. And I'm not saying fight with the federal government, but not agree with everything. Because at the end of the day, what Albertans know, and I don't think Rachel Notley really understands, is that appeasement doesn't work with a federal Liberal government. Appeasement does not work. The federal Liberal government will always use, Alberta as a wedge, as a whipping post to generate support in other areas of the country. You know this intimately, and I think it's really important to have a leader that understands that and will ensure that our needs are put into a national perspective. And I don't, and it's not the same as when Notley was premier 4 years ago. You've got a federal NDP that is in a governing coalition with the federal government and has not achieved much for Western Canada at all. So it's a problem for me. And look, if the Notley, if the provincial NDP want to explain how they're going to do that, they haven't done that yet. And the election's almost over. And I'm talking to you as a voter, not as a member of parliament. So yeah, Danielle Smith will be getting my vote.
Okay, cool. Listen, what a fun conversation. Thank you. It's just great to sit here and chat with you and go over stuff. And I hope you'll come back. I really love talking politics with you. It's great.
Thanks.
I got one more question for you. You're going to run again?
Yes, I'm very excited. In fact,
yes.
am I allowed to do a donation plug on your
Sure,
show?
absolutely. Sure.
Donate to
go
my
right ahead.
campaign, please. Don't know when the next federal election is going to be. No, I'm excited. And I'll tell you why I want to run again. I am really enjoying the stability in our caucus. It is so nice to go to work and like we're rowing in the same direction. That sort of tension that's been there for years, it's gone. And it's nice to be able to really work again. And it's exciting. So yes, donate to my campaign, David.
Well, maybe not, but you've got some heart from me.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you too.
I have. I have done. I have done.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for coming on. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail, and everybody out there that watched or listened. We had a great time today. Hope you enjoyed it. And we'll be back next week with more of the Herle Burly. Take care of yourselves.
Thanks.
Herle Burly.